Tonight, I want you to do something most Americans never do. I want you to imagine what didn't happen. Not what the headlines say, not the sanitized press release. I want you to picture the night that almost unfolded in Los Angeles. And then I want you to ask yourself why you didn't hear about it the way you should have. Because this wasn't a hoax. It wasn't a prank. And it wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an alleged coordinated terror plot, stopped quietly, with almost no public awareness. And that silence should bother you. The most dangerous attacks are the ones that never happen. Not because they weren't real, but because when they're stopped early, they disappear into bureaucratic fog. No viral footage, no body count, no emotional hook for cable news. Just a line item in a law enforcement briefing and a few carefully chosen phrases like alleged and ongoing investigation, and no credible threat to the public. That's how real danger gets buried. According to sworn court documents and federal investigators, multiple individuals tied to an anti-government extremist network were taken into custody in the Los Angeles area ahead of a major holiday window. The alleged plan involved coordination, timing, and symbolic targets. That's not random. That's not lone wolf behavior. That's organization. And organization is what separates unstable talk from real-world violence. When an attack succeeds, the story writes itself. When it fails, especially when it's stopped quietly, the narrative becomes inconvenient. It raises questions no one wants to answer. How long were they being watched? How close were we? What exactly was planned? And how many similar plots never make the news at all? Los Angeles is not just another city. It's a symbolic target. Global visibility, cultural influence, infrastructure density. When extremist groups look for impact, they don't pick locations at random. They pick places that guarantee attention. This wasn't some backyard fantasy. It was allegedly designed to be seen. Modern extremism doesn't look like what people expect. It isn't foreign accents or overseas training camps. Its decentralized ideology spreads faster than command structures. Groups form online, radicalized in echo chambers and operationalized locally. No passports required, no international travel needed, just belief, grievance, and coordination. That's what makes moments like this dangerous. Law enforcement faces a dilemma when they disrupt plots like this. Go too public too early and compromise investigations. Stay quiet too long and leave the public unaware of the threat environment they actually live in. Most agencies choose silence, not because they don't care, but because the system rewards calm over candor. But calm without clarity creates complacency. Threat isn't binary, it's a spectrum. And when multiple suspects are arrested in connection with a coordinated plan, the threat was not theoretical. Plots don't start with weapons. They start with narratives, stories of betrayal, of collapse, of needing to do something. When those narratives go unchallenged, they harden. When they harden, they attract others. And when they attract others, planning begins. That's what authorities mean when they say a plot was disrupted. They didn't stop an idea. They interrupted a process that had already advanced. Plots are built, not born. They move through phases. Grievance creates emotional permission. Validation removes doubt. Capability assessment turns belief into logistics. Coordination assigns roles and narrows timelines. To understand why federal authorities took this threat seriously, you have to understand who was involved and what investigators say they stopped. Not in headlines, not in talking points, but in sworn court documents. According to the Department of Justice and FBI affidavits, the alleged plot centered around a group identifying itself as the Turtle Island Liberation Front, commonly referred to as TILF. Turtle Island is a term used in some indigenous traditions to refer to North America. Federal prosecutors say the group adopted this name as part of a broader ideology rooted in anti-government, anti-capitalistic, and revolutionary beliefs, framing the United States as an illegitimate colonial entity that must be dismantled rather than reformed. According to the court filings, this was not a protest movement. It was not symbolic activism. Prosecutors allege it was a group actively discussing and preparing violent action as a means of advancing its goals. And this is where people need to slow down. Because when officials say anti-government extremist, they are not talking about dissent, criticism, or unpopular opinions. They are talking about a belief system that explicitly justifies violence against institutions, infrastructure, and people as acceptable, sometimes even necessary. That distinction matters. Federal investigators say the plot did not come out of nowhere. According to FBI affidavits, attention was drawn to individuals connected to TILF through online communications, encrypted messaging platforms, and in-person meetings that gradually escalated from ideological discussion into operational planning. Investigators allege the group began discussing coordinated attacks timed to coincide with New Year's Eve, a date chosen not at random, but because of crowd density, distraction, emotional significance, and symbolic transition. According to prosecutors, FBI surveillance intensified after agents became aware of discussions involving explosive devices, concealment, and evasion of law enforcement detection. At that point, the investigation shifted from monitoring rhetoric to assessing capability and intent, the exact threshold where federal counterterrorism operations typically intervene. One of the most disturbing details to emerge from court documents is an alleged handwritten plan referred to as Operation Midnight Sun. According to prosecutors, the document outlined simultaneous attacks, multiple potential targets, instructions for constructing improvised explosive devices, guidance on avoiding DNA transfer and forensic identification, and timing designed to blend explosions with fireworks at midnight. Federal authorities allege the document explicitly referred to as the plan as a terrorist act. That word matters because it wasn't applied by the media. It appears in court filings attributed to the suspects themselves. This is the point where any reasonable person should stop saying nothing happened, because what didn't happen only didn't happen because intervention did. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office, 4 individuals were arrested in Southern California in connection with the alleged plot. Prosecutors allege these individuals used aliases, encrypted communication platforms, and compartmentalized roles to limit exposure if one person was compromised. Court filings describe meetings, travel to remote desert areas, and the acquisition of materials consistent with bomb-making components. All 4 were charged with federal conspiracy offenses, including possession of unregistered destructive devices. Prosecutors have stated publicly that additional charges may follow as digital evidence is fully analyzed. Every one of these individuals is presumed innocent in court. That matters. But the evidence cited in affidavits is extensive. According to the FBI, agents recovered materials consistent with improvised explosive device construction, tools used for assembly, written notes and diagrams, and electronic communication discussing testing and refinement. Investigators allege some of this activity occurred in remote desert locations, chosen specifically to avoid detection. This matters because it demonstrates operational discipline, not impulse. This was not someone venting online. This was people preparing. Los Angeles was not incidental. Federal prosecutors emphasize that the city represents dense population centers, critical infrastructure, international media visibility, and symbolic cultural weight. When extremist groups seek impact, they do not aim small, they aim loud. Authorities have also confirmed the investigation extended beyond California. A 5th individual, arrested in Louisiana, is alleged to have been connected through communications and ideological alignment. This reflects a broader reality. Domestic extremism is decentralized but networked. No headquarters, no uniforms, no clear hierarchy. Just ideology, communication, and opportunity. Now we return to the silence. Why wasn't this wall-to-wall news? Because failed terror plots do not produce spectacle, and modern media runs on spectacle. But the absence of spectacle does not equal the absence of danger. In fact, it often means the opposite. The most successful counterterrorism operations are the ones the public barely notices. This story isn't about left or right. It's about legitimacy versus collapse. When people decide the system itself is illegitimate, anything becomes justifiable. That belief is more dangerous than any single ideology because it removes moral limits. And that belief is spreading quietly, online, every day. What often gets lost in stories like this is the human tendency to underestimate slow-moving threats. People react to explosions and sirens, not to planning and documents and encrypted chats. But danger exists long before noise. Federal investigators have repeatedly said the hardest cases to stop are not the loud ones, but the disciplined ones, the ones that study past failures and adapt. According to prosecutors, that discipline appeared here. The use of aliases, compartmentalization, and isolated testing. These locations point to learning, and isolated testing locations point to learning. That learning comes from previous cases, from watching what failed, from refining behavior. This creates a quiet arms race between prevention and concealment. On one side, you have investigators working within legal limits. On the other side, you have individuals trying to stay just below the thresholds while advancing toward action. The margin for error is thin. This is why intervention timing matters. Wait too long and prevention becomes reaction. Move too early and evidence may be insufficient. According to prosecutors, this case crossed the point where inaction carried greater risk than action. Conspiracy laws exist for a reason. They are designed to stop trains before derailment, not after. Public discomfort with that reality is understandable. People want certainty, but certainty in these cases often arrives too late. Another factor is ideology. Extremist belief systems often reframe violence as responsibility. Harm becomes necessary. Sacrifice becomes virtue. Once that internal shift occurs, reversal becomes extremely difficult. Disruption interrupts that process, but disruption is not a cure. It is a pause. Investigations continue long after arrests. Devices are analyzed, networks mapped. Sometimes connections emerge, sometimes they don't. Either way, the work continues. From the public's perspective, the story ends at arrested. In reality, that's the midpoint. Prevention cannot rely solely on law enforcement. It also depends on cultural awareness and the ability to recognize when rhetoric crosses into justification for harm. This is not about policing thought. It is about recognizing patterns. The line between activism and extremism is not belief intensity. It is willingness to harm. Los Angeles was spared violence that night. Families went home. Streets stayed quiet. That outcome matters, but it should not be taken for granted. Everything above is what could have been. Every quiet night built on intervention is a reminder of how thin the margin really is. The phrase "nothing happened" is comforting, but it's incomplete. Nothing happened because something was done. The conditions that produced this plot did not disappear with arrests. They persist. The question is not whether threats will emerge again. They will. The question is whether they will be recognized early enough. Silence alone does not solve that problem. Neither does panic. What is required is awareness without hysteria, nuance without denial, respect for prevention without demanding tragedy first. The night that almost happened in Los Angeles will fade from memory, but the pattern it represents will not. Patterns repeat until they are interrupted consistently. That is the real lesson of this story. As always, stay tuned, stay aware, stay vigilant. Watchman out.